Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 5 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Before we begin, as always, we are available on Telegram now, and you can download the app via the QR code given here or the link given in the description below, and you can subscribe to our channel on Telegram and on YouTube, and that will help you in keeping up to date with all the videos we upload. With this, let's begin our analysis for today. And we start with some encouraging news coming out of the economy sector. It is important for your GS paper 3. And finally, we have reached halfway mark of what we had predicted in our budget with regards to direct tax receipts or direct tax collection in that regard. When we talk about net direct taxes, India at the same point of time has reached halfway mark under the budgetary targets and also has seen an increase in the overall collection or the receipts of the net direct taxes. So India's net direct tax collection till 8th October in the fiscal year of 2022-23 has risen to 7.4 lakh crore rupees, which is more than half of what we had targeted under the budget. And this is also an increase of 16.3% over the tax inflows in the corresponding period a year ago. So we have seen a 16.3% increase when we talk about 2022 and 2023 vis-a-vis 2021, 2022, and this is also half of what we had predicted under, or this was our estimated target under our budget itself. So this is encouraging, but what is more important is to analyze this data much more closely. And if you look at the data itself, direct tax collection has increased by 23.8%, but what is more encouraging is the fact that after even giving refunds, direct tax collection is at 16.3%. Refunds mean that people paid more taxes, and under their Form 16 or under their declaration with regards to the income tax department, they got refunds on their income tax, and that is more or less the standard case, that you pay more taxes and the IT department gives you a refund, and therefore the net of refund is much more important. So though the absolute increase is 23.8%, when we adjust it for the refunds, we come to 16.3%. Same is true for corporate income tax, which has also increased at the same level. Both these two indicators are very, very important because this shows that there is a proper recovery out of COVID-19, because income was one of the aspects which was hit quite a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have been over a period of time throughout this month seeing a different indicators which are talking about COVID-19 recovery. Therefore, corporate income tax and direct tax collection both indicate towards the fact that income and consumption both are resuming the past levels, and because it is up by 16.3% year on year, it shows that there is also growth in this sector. When we talk about personal tax, including securities transaction tax in layman terms is generally a tax which is on stock market transaction, but the exact definition is that it is tax payable in India on the value of securities. Securities could be equity, could be debt, excluding commodities and currency transacted at a recognized stock exchange. It is type of a turnover tax where an investor is obligated to pay a tax on total sum received or paid during a transaction done through an exchange. So it's generally any transaction at a stock exchange, be it the BSC, be it the NSE, we have to pay a certain type of tax which is called securities transaction tax. So when we add personal income tax plus securities transaction tax, it becomes 32.3%, but then we have to adjust it for refunds and it comes to 17.35%. Corporate tax after adjusting for the refunds is also at 16.29%. Though you don't have to remember these absolute data, what it is technically indicating, and that is why we've chosen this topic, is that there is growth. There is growth in income. There is generally a encouraging sign that India is totally coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic in the sense of income, because income is a very important indicator. If income goes up, consumption goes up, demand goes up, and that is internally very, very important for India because income was hit quite a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic. So based on provisional data, net personal income tax collection grew by 17.35%. and this was rising faster than corporate income tax, which was at 16.29% net of refunds. And remember, net of refunds means after giving refunds what the IT department owed to the people. Security transaction tax collection combined with personal income tax grew by 16.25%. As I said, the absolute data is of no purpose to you. This data is indicative of growth, which is more encouraging for us. Underlining that the direct tax collection continues to register a steady growth itself, the finance ministry said that tax refunds jumped to 81% over the preceding year and touched at 1.53 lakh crore, which is equally important because refunds is a very important transaction between the people and the IT department. As much as we're seeing an increase in direct tax collection, at the same point of time refunds have also increased, which is also indicative, technically dampens the whole concept, because if refunds are more means that the income initially in the year was more, however by the end of the year the income was not at the level at which they were being taxed throughout the year. So it is both an indicator of growth but also showing that income at some level did shrink in some households and with some people. So why are we doing this topic? Because as such this topic is pure economics, and though this data has no real purpose to us in the examination, you can talk about direct tax collection and say how direct tax collection is also an indicator of growth and how we have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic in that regard. So direct tax collection reaching 50% and more than that coming at the level of 16.3% year on year, there is a growth, is encouraging. As much as it is being dampened by the refunds, there is an encouraging trend in the Indian economy, and that is the point we're trying to make. So gross tax collection reached 8.98 lakh crore by Saturday, 23.8% more than corresponding year. As we saw the data, the refund rate goes down. After adjusting for refunds, net direct tax revenue now constitutes 52.46% of the total budget estimates, and this is the encouraging aspect, that 52.46% we have already reached with regards to what we had to do under the budgetary estimates. In that regard, we are not falling short of it. We have already reached 50% more or less in the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year itself. So why is this topic important? It's important because it's an encouraging sign. For the purpose of the examination, mains examination, prelims, we don't expect a question from here. But with regards to mains examination, you can talk about COVID-19 recovery and how direct tax collection in the year 2022-2023 is corresponding and is attesting the fact that we have come out of the pandemic, and that data is very encouraging in that regard. So this topic quite small, however important, because this could have been a totally different picture, and we have been able to turn around, and India is recovering properly out of the pandemic and its lockdowns. Let's move to the second topic. The second topic is about the Graded Response Action Plan, what is called the GRAP, and we've been talking about it for quite a long time because Delhi and its pollution is a very pressing topic, a very important topic with regards to environment. There have been different type of solutions which have been put forward, but the Graded Response Action Plan has been the most comprehensive in that regard. And today we get an opportunity to understand the different levels and how it responds to each and every level in that regard. Now, when it comes to this topic, which is important for GS paper 3, obviously you will not learn each and every response, but what you will learn is the basic principles which are being applied in the Graded Response Action Plan. We already know that with Diwali, you have the burning of crackers. Over and above that, the stubble burning in Punjab and Haryana contributes to the pollution. However, what does Delhi do once it falls under poor or very poor under the Graded Response Action Plan? That is more important. So a revised action plan to fight the serious challenge of air pollution in Delhi and the National Capital Region has come into force with a sudden dip in air quality in the capital and its neighboring regions. And this is standard when it comes to when winter sets on in Delhi. With the rise of fog and smog, the air pollution levels increase quite a lot, and with PM 2.5 and 10 being the major problem in Delhi itself, which is particulate matter 2.5 and 10 being one of the most detrimental to the health. So on 6th October, the first stage of the revised Graded Response Action Plan was implemented. But what is more important to us is what is the history of this plan itself, how did it come about, and that will allow us to understand the static portion of this topic. So it is a multifaceted plan which was for the multifaceted risk related to air pollution. The Central Pollution Control Board submitted a list of measures to address different levels of air pollution in the Supreme Court in January of 2016. So since 2016, this whole plan has been materializing. These measures were then collated into what we call as GRAP, a set of anti-air pollution measures which would be followed in Delhi and the vicinity when there is severity in the situation. The GRAP was then approved by the Supreme Court after modifications, and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change put it into effect on January 12th, 2017. However, because there are multiplicity of institutions who will implement it, the center then set up the Commission for Air Quality Management in the National Capital Region and adjoining areas, and this body was given the authority to enforce the GRAP. This powerful body, which coordinates with other states to plan and execute strategies to prevent and control air pollution in the NCR, was enforcing the GRAP since 2021. Now, we've been using the word revised quite a lot. So what was revised under the GRAP this time? Previously, GRAP was taken under when PM 2.5 and 10 were above a certain limit, then only GRAP used to come into force. However, under the revised action plan, the restrictions on pollution based activities will be dependent on the air quality index rather than just on PM 2.5 and PM 10 concentration. So it's not the particulate matter concentration, it's overall air quality in that regard. So the history is very simple, which is that the commission was formed after the Supreme Court approved the GRAP, and since 2016 we have been articulating it. And when we talk about air quality index, now we are using a much more absolute term rather than just using PM 2.5 and 10 as the basic indicators. Now what I have done is that I have gone through the article and I put the major responses in two different boxes, which is that when it is poor, between 201 to 300, when it is very poor, which is the AQI between 301 and 400, what is the response? The article has put it in a haphazard way. I put it here as a form of a table, and you can either take screenshots of this and understand what is the response. So when the first stage kicks in, which is the air quality index shows poor, what we see is, what is the first principle which is put in is technically ban on basic activities, which is ban on construction and demolition activities. Specific sites will be then chosen to do this ban. Agency should ensure that all solid waste is lifted from dedicated dump sites and none is dumped on open land so as to not add to the odor and the pollution. Heavy fines are to be imposed on openly burning municipal solid waste and biomass. Roads will mechanically be cleaned and water sprinklers will be used from time to time. Ban on firecrackers should be followed as per the directions of respective courts. So the first is more about solid waste and making sure that solid waste burning does not happen. So the first principle is make sure that construction and demolition activity is not happening and control that. However, if this does not work and we go to very poor, which is 301 to 400, the next set of regulations come in, which is mechanized sweeping of the roads, while water will be sprinkled using dust suppressant, at least on alternative dates. Authorities would need to ensure that there is uninterrupted power supply to discourage use of generators. So this stage is more about making sure that water sprinklers are used so that the dust is settled down. So the first principle is controlling the solid waste itself. Then it is about controlling dust using water sprinklers. Then we move on to the next two, which is severe and severe plus. Under 3, which is frequent road cleaning, will become intensified. So intensive road cleaning. Water would be then sprinkled daily before peak traffic hours. This was to make sure that in the water droplets, the dust particles would come down. Authorities will levy different rates on public transport service to ensure off-peak travel. A strict ban will be enforced on all construction activities except ongoing construction of railway, metro, rail, airport and hospital projects, the essential projects in that regard. The state government will also have the power to impose restriction on Bharat Stage 3 petrol and 4 diesel light motor vehicles in that regard. So it is an important stage in that regard, that here now we go for car and vehicular concept, which is that the pollution which is happening because of vehicle emissions will now be controlled in that sense. So the severe plus, which is the next stage, which is the highest stage in that regard, is even more dangerous but even more severe when it comes to bans. When the air quality rises to the dangerous levels, entry of all trucks except those carrying essential commodities will be restricted. So trucks are now actually stopped from entering Delhi. Any LMV which is four-wheeled light motor vehicle which is diesel driven, could be banned except for essential emergency services. All construction activity and demolition activities would be stopped. The respective governments would meanwhile take a call on allowing public, municipal and private offices to work on 50% strength, and additional emergency measures like closing schools, non-emergency commercial activities and plying vehicles on odd even basis may be enforced. So when we talk about first, second, third and fourth, first is more about construction activity, solid waste. When we go to second, it's about controlling the pollution and settling it down through water and dust particles. Third is when we go into vehicular pollution, which is to check the pollution via diesel vehicles and Bharat stage 3 and Bharat stage 4 diesel. But when it reaches severe plus, we go into odd even scheme itself and all construction activity goes down. Trucks are not allowed to enter into Delhi. So this topic, what do you need to learn? You don't need to learn each and every measure. What you need to learn is that what are the basic principles. The basic principle is vehicular pollution, solid waste, the concept of trucks, the concept of diesel, construction activities, odd even basis, and how all this comes together to make sure that pollution in Delhi is controlled. So now we've understood two very important topics out of GS paper 3. First, which is related to the concept of how we have reached our budgetary estimates halfway mark with regards to direct tax collection, important for recovery out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now the concept of graded response action plan, and I hope that you understand the basic contours of it. What has been revised is not the fact that just PM 2.5 and 10 will be used. What will be used is not just PM, which is particulate matter indicators, but the air quality index in that regard as an overall indicator. I've already showed you the basic principles and I hope you understand the importance of this concept. Now let's move to the third important topic and something which I've been developing for quite a long time, which is the European inflation. And now Europe's inflation has peaked, and this is technically linked to Russia and Ukraine. We already know that there's an ongoing war in the Russia-Ukraine sector. And as of right now, we also saw the Crimean bridge being destroyed, which is technically a lifeline between Russia and Crimea itself. Now when we talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict itself, we tend to actually look towards Ukraine and Russia more and less towards Europe. And in a previous CNA itself, I pointed out that Europe is up for a energy war very quickly. But in this edition of the Hindu newspaper, we got something very interesting, which is data to support the fact that Europe is now seeing a major crisis when it comes to energy, and energy and inflation go together when it comes to shortages. Therefore, energy related inflation across Europe started to rise post-Ukraine invasion and accelerated to over 40% in recent months. Data shows that a combination of supply squeeze from Russia, self-imposed import restrictions have led to surge in Europe's energy prices. Inflation across European regions has spiraled up uncontrollably since Ukraine's invasion, and we know that there were two aspects to this. First, the EU tried to put in sanctions on Russia. Russia in retaliation stopped the supply of oil itself and gas itself, and therefore now Russia has a basic edge over the European Union because EU was too dependent on Russia when it comes to its oil. Therefore, Russia in a way has an upper hand in this battle because EU generally is facing the crunch when it comes to energy and when it comes to inflation. So Russia-Ukraine conflict today is showing us that a conflict anywhere in the world can then escalate and become much bigger than what it is as of right now. EU thought that economic sanctions will work, but technically economic sanctions are backfiring on them, and now we have basic raw data to actually support that. And this is the ongoing topic which I've been developing, which is the EU side of the Russia-Ukraine story, the energy crisis in EU. So let's look at the data. When we look at the data more closely, this graph is very telling, which is that though inflation is generally rising, which is overall, and food, energy inflation has been skyrocketing since the last 3 months. So chart 1, which is this chart, shows month-wise inflation rate in the EU since 2010 across various sectors. While the overall inflation and food inflation have surged to a 10-year high, the increase in energy prices is much bigger in that regard. And this can be correspondingly checked with chart 2, which shows energy related inflation in the select European countries. So these two go together, this is overall inflation in EU itself. And when we see these basic graphs, we are seeing a spike in all of them with regards to energy when it comes to UK, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy and Netherlands. So in the UK, energy inflation crossed a 70% mark, and in Spain it crossed a 60% mark, while Netherlands it almost touched 100% inflation in oil. In all these nations, if you analyze them, energy related inflation levels have reached a 10-year peak. And this is what we were discussing last time, that energy related inflation is something which has become now Russia's weapon to technically destroy the EU itself. Now the basic question which arises here is why? And that can be explained by chart number 3 and chart number 4. Chart 3 shows the share of Russia's oil import in total domestic oil consumption of a country. The figure points out the average between 2014 to 2019. Oil supplies from Russia formed 38% of Germany's domestic oil demand, while Belgium, Finland, Netherlands had very high dependency on oil needs from Russia. So this technically shows you how much oil out of their total oil was coming from Russia. So in Lithuania, you can see that Russian oil imports in total domestic oil consumption was 280%. And if you look at Slovakia, Netherlands, Belgium, 79, 69, 39%, as high as 280%, 160% is the basic dependency on Russian oil imports, is a very big indicator how Russia had the whole EU by its knuckle, that basically if Russia stopped oil imports into EU would technically starve. And this can be correspondingly checked with table number 4, which shows Russia's share in country's total oil imports. And the data is provided for 2 periods, February 21 to June 21 and February 2022 to June 22. And what it shows is Russia formed 60 to 75% of Finland's total oil imports in 2021, and this had been reduced to 10 to 30%. And herein lies the reason. You can see all across the board, each and every country has reduced oil import from Russia. This in turn, if you look at it with chart number 3, shows their dependency. So they were dependent on oil imports, but because of Russia-Ukraine conflict, they went for sanctions. That has in turn led to month by month inflation in the EU sector. So what is the solution? The solution as of right now is nothing. They are trying to figure out a joint action plan with regards to prices in oil and gas. But I have done this topic in order to understand that there are two sides to the war itself. One, Ukraine is reeling, Russia also is seeing a lot of problems, but the EU never expected this type of a problem. They were too dependent on Russia for their oil and gas, and now technically that is backfiring on them. So when we talk about the winter is coming analogy, the winter is coming rhetoric, winter is truly coming in Europe, which is that their energy inflation is at the highest point, and with their dependency and their recent fall in oil imports from Russia as a form of their economic sanction, everything is backfiring on them in the long run. So it's an important story. It's a cautionary story for everyone. When we talk about war, war comes with its consequences, and this is one of them. Let's move to the fourth topic, which is UN Peacekeeping Forces. We all know that India is one of the most important contributors to what are called the UN Peacekeeping Forces, UN missions in that regard. However, recently in the Democratic Republic of Congo, 2 BSF officers were dead because of the fact that there is now a lot of violence which is happening against the UN Peacekeeping Forces, which is the United Nations peacekeeping program, under which the UN provides certain number of personnel to ensure peace. Remember, it's about ensuring peace. It's not technically about going to war. It's not a military assistance. It's about keeping status quo, ensuring peace. Now, there has been a spate of attacks on the United Nations peacekeepers after 2 BSF Jawans have lost their life. So the issue of growing fatalities and the lack of clear mandate for the blue helmets, as they're called because they wear blue helmets with the UN written on it, has been one of the most important issues which the UN peacekeeping chief has been talking about in his tour of India, Pakistan, UAE and Japan. And remember, India and Pakistan both contribute a lot of their Jawans and officers into this UN mission itself. Therefore, the UN peacekeeping forces have now become targets for different groups in different countries. And what he's been trying to argue is that we need a clear mandate. What are we there for? Are we there to check peace, or are we there to fight with them? And who will be held accountable if our Jawans are losing their life? The basic point is accountability. Who is accountable? And how do we honor these Jawans who have lost their lives when it comes to the fight for peace in the world? So soldiers need a more robust and proactive mandate. What is their role? Better equipment to deal with what is the deteriorating situation in a lot of countries where UN peacekeepers are posted. The UN peacekeeping fatalities due to malicious acts, which are not illness or accidents, have now increased. Once they were declining, but now have started to rise from 13 in 2020 to 25 in 2021 and 26 till date in 2022. So we have already surpassed the number from 2021. So the question is why? Why is that UN peacekeepers are actually facing this heat, and what is the issue? Because UN missions were not fatal for any Jawans previously. What is happening now? Many of the peacekeeping operations are in an environment which is deteriorating, both in the context of political environment and security environment. And technically this is not the mandate of the UN. UN mandate and UN peacekeeping mandate is to keep status quo. However, deterioration of the situation, which is based on different actors or stakeholders in the war, means that their mandate needs to change. In many of the operations, particularly in big operations in Africa, we, meaning the UN peacekeepers, are facing groups that are either terrorist groups or criminal groups, and they are not interested in peace. They are interested in only chaos, not stability. So they don't want peace, they don't want justice, they don't want stability. What they want is chaos. And the way to now induce chaos is to target the UN itself. So how do we go forward? India, as of right now, has proposed a 10-point plan under which UN peacekeepers who have been targeted, these groups need to be held accountable. More than that, crime against peacekeepers should constitute to war crimes, so that the people who have been held accountable should also face justice. And peacekeeping has its limitations, and it is technically not war. Therefore, the word peacekeeping itself means that they don't have the expertise or the training to go to war with certain groups. Therefore, we need to make sure that it's not just about peace enforcement. You don't enforce peace, you maintain peace. So we have to have a robust mandate which requires our peacekeepers to be proactive and be able to go after any armed groups. However, these mandates are not clear. Can you shoot on a certain group? Yes, if you're trying to protect the civilians, what will you do? This is the problem in this story. They maintain peace. Maintaining peace is very different from enforcing peace. This is a new alarming development. People are not talking about it, but it is equally important, becomes important in the larger story of Indian diplomatic relations. And India being a very important contributor to these peacekeeping missions in Africa, it is important that we honor who have been martyred. Second, there needs to be accountability on the groups who are doing this. Third, they should also be punished for what they are doing. With this, let's enter the last topic, which is the chip shortage. Again, a topic which has been brewing up for close to a year. But what this article, which is from an IAS officer himself, is trying to argue, and it is a very interesting point in that regard. India has been pushing for chip manufacturing in India. However, chip manufacturing in India or in any other country is a very slippery slope and needs a lot of time to become or anything meaningful in that regard. So whilst the fate of nations depend today totally on a small piece of silicon, and the fact is that there is a major shortage for that, the fact is that we can't hastily put in any program which would bring in chip manufacturers to India, but would then destroy our environment or generally the basic social institutions in that area. So though every message we send, every picture we take, and every call we pick depends on the chip, he takes the example technically of the Apple A16 chip which has been introduced with iPhone 14. What he argues is that if you look at the quantum, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the TSMC, the world's leading manufacturer of chips, placed 1 quintillion, 1 followed by 18 zeros transistor in just one iPhone chip, which is the A16 chip. So one iPhone chip, A16 chip, has 1 quintillion transistors. Apple buys its chips from Cirrus Logic, Kioxia, Skywords and TSMC. It designs these in-house, and the super complex process that runs the iPhone operating system is actually made not in America, not by Apple, but by a Taiwanese company. So even a trillion-dollar company like Apple is not able to manufacture its own chips. A16 Bionic chip, which has been introduced by iPhone 14, is technically made by a single company in a single building called Building 18 in Taipei, and TSMC Fabs, which is the fabrication, is perhaps the world's most expensive and valuable factory in that regard. So as of right now, which are the countries which actually manufacture chips? Taiwan, South Korea, US, Japan, Netherlands and China, but US quite less in volume when it comes to these chips. Taiwan and South Korea being the most important. Now, what the author is trying to contextualize is we understand the importance. This was the importance of the chips. One single chip has so many transistors. There are only handful of manufacturers. We understand the importance. Now, it is about how do we come out of this chip shortage, because there is a shortage in that regard. Even major defense and car manufacturers are facing a chip shortage. So the ability to manufacture chips, also the ability to integrate and synthesize them into complex systems, will determine the fate of nations in the coming decades. Critical sectors such as defense, telecom, electronics and mobility are hugely impacted by chip shortage, which would only end by 2023 end as per research studies, and any natural disaster in South Korea or Taiwan could then worsen the crisis itself, because they're two biggest manufacturers. The US, EU, Japan, India and China have poured in close to $200 billion into semiconductor sectors, but the impact cannot be seen as of right now. And the US was ready to even defend Taiwan should there be aggression from China, probably because no other country is capable of producing chips better and faster than Taiwan or South Korea at this point of time. Now, why is this story a cautionary tale? The cautionary tale is because whilst India has a visionary step in subsidizing what is called the PLI scheme, production linked incentive scheme, in this sector to subsidize chip manufacturing through PLI, there is one cautionary tale one must bear in mind, which is called don't be Foxconned. Foxconn is actually the biggest company which produces chips for Apple itself. It is also in India, but there's a saying that don't be Foxconned, because chip manufacturing is not a very simple task. It is quite complex, needs a lot of resources and needs a lot of understanding in that regard. So though Indian states have been pushing for chip manufacturing in India, while competing to quote chip manufacturing investments, one must bear in mind that steady electricity, billions of gallons of clean water is required to set up a chip unit, which none of the states can offer as of right now. Chip manufacturing will require even more. India will get these with prudent strategies and sensible leadership in the coming decades. However, chip manufacturing costs $15 billion to $20 billion, and it would take years to recoup and make it profitable over a period of time. So therefore, to actually build a plant, you need $15 to $20 billion, and it would take time to make it profitable and recoup this basic investment, and it would also need the plant to run for years. Therefore, with the global supply chain in turmoil thanks to COVID-19 and Ukraine war, the game of chips is even more complicated now. Every major economic superpower is using its money and its best minds to win this silicon battle. It will impact the lives of citizens in more ways than one, and technically India can't afford to lose this war. So what have we done today? We've tried to understand 5 very interesting topics, more of GS paper 3. First, we tried to understand how we have met 50% of our budgetary estimate when it comes to direct taxes. Direct taxes are a very important indicator of how Indian economy has recovered, and with income increasing, consumption will increase. Then thereafter we moved to the graded response action plan, and we tried to understand the basic principles which are applied in how the poor, very poor, severe and severe plus categories work. And we tried to understand the revised action plan, which is not using just PM 2.5 and 10, but air quality index as an absolute indicator. Then we tried to understand the EU's energy crisis, This time we had a lot of data to support that, how they were totally dependent on Russian oil and gas, and with the sanctions applied by them also, it is totally backfiring on them, because at the end of the day there is a major 10-year high inflation in energy all across EU, and they need to do something about that. Thereafter, we moved on to the concept of UN peacekeeping, how the peacekeeping forces are now being targeted by different armed groups, and 2 jawans from India have lost their life. They've been martyred on line of duty, and therefore there needs to be a clearer mandate how to respond to armed groups and better equipment to technically enforce peace. But the difference between maintaining peace and enforcing peace, it is not war. And what is the role of the UN or the UN peacekeeping forces needs to be clearly mandated and clearly specified. The last topic which we did was on chip manufacturing and chip shortage. First, we tried to understand the importance. Only a handful of countries are actually producing chips, specifically Taiwan and South Korea, and it is very, very important that we respond to it. We have been able to do that via the PLI scheme in chip manufacturing, but what the author is trying to point out is that is a slippery slope. A lot of energy, a lot of water is needed for a chip manufacturing plant. More than that, it has very high cost of establishment, therefore it would only become profitable over a period of time. Therefore India has to fight this battle. However, we need to be very clear in our strategy and in our basic understanding of this issue. With this, let's look at the mains question. What is a graded response action plan? What are the main principles in its attempt to mitigate pollution? It's a very simple but interesting question. We're talking about the principles, how it fights pollution, and what is it. Second, the chip shortage in the world can paralyze the world economy. Discuss. This is a very interesting question, talking about the importance, how it is linked to defense, manufacturing, any other sector, any basic sector from automobile to even missiles. Everything is using chips, and if there's a shortage, there's a problem. With this, I would like to end this session. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.